Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Kernodle. School board races are becoming increasingly competitive, and some places are considering measures to allow them to be partisan as well. Joining me to discuss this is Chalkboard News editor Brendan Clary. Brendan, what is at stake here?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Eliana. Essentially, the question about whether school board member races should be partisan or nonpartisan, I think you can kind of get into a lot of different aspects about this. And essentially, Julie Marsh, who is basically an expert on this, a professor of education at the University of Southern California, she said to our freelancer that school board elections have seen a lot more of this politicization, and to her, the sort of fate of democracy is kind of on the line, right? So I think that in the way that she put it is that that adding party affiliations to the school board, ballots could hurt democracy and could create, like a less informed electorate. And that was her argument, that basically just looks at the letters behind a candidate's name. Like, are they a Republican? Are they a Democrat? Do they align with my values? And you can kind of see that without having to do any research, basically. And so I think that is one of the concerns. Like, you don't have to know who you're voting for. You just go to the ballot and then you say, like, can I just go down the ticket, right? And go Republican or Democrat. And, I think that is one outcome of this. If you have if you are considering turning nonpartisan elections into partisan elections, that could be, in effect, you might inject more politicization. I think that is a risk potentially, that you would have people going after the other side, essentially, and sort of invoking some of these other national debates around like hot topics, right? And, in recent years, really, I mean, I think this has been going on a long time, but especially since COVID-19, when parents were very active and very vocal in a lot of school boards, because of the masking, right? Because of these different kinds of COVID issues, online learning, they kind of saw, this is when I talk to sources, this is what they tell me, is that, people were kind of awakened by seeing what kids were learning at the kitchen table during COVID, right? Everybody was home. If you could work from home, you were there with your kids and you were seeing for the first time maybe, or moms who had to stay home during COVID. Again, they're seeing what their kids are working on and they're like, it's not very much, and they're getting there and they're vocal. And so you've seen a lot of grassroots stuff. And anyway, you've seen a lot of different kinds of issues coming up in school boards. And so I think you could kind of see that you could maybe see that heightened, some of these questions about what to do with LGBTQ plus books, right? In the libraries, right? What if they have some of these sexual scenes in them, right? That's really gotten into some of these debates about should we ban those kinds of books or should we not? And so, you have school board members who could run on that and maybe start using some of the political talking points and make that more into a political thing. At the same time, too, it's how much of that will be affected, right, by having an R&D at the end of the name. If, you're going to go and look at that candidate anyway and try to see where do they stand on the issues that are important to you, right? Because I think you have to, you kind of have to draw lines in the sand on these issues as, a candidate, right? And try to figure that. So it might be, kind of splitting hairs at a certain point because, people will have these kinds of positions. So it's, I think that you can kind of see where this might creep in, but it also might not make too much of a difference. I think it might be is there an ideal world where you can have truly nonpartisan school board elections? I think that might be kind of what's going on. But then in sort of the 2024 political discourse, I think there's a lot of politics all over the place. So can you avoid it is maybe the question.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a chicken or the egg argument of is doing this going to make things more politicized, or is it just kind of, it's already politicized? That's why this question is coming up, is that there are these states that are considering laws to allow school boards to be partisan, and there's many school board candidates that have been endorsed by Republicans or Democrats, by significant national figures who have identified themselves with those figures. And would it change things if you're changing that policy, or is it just sort of acknowledging what's already there? So Marsh also brought up some more specific concerns of how this might impact candidates and races and who's willing to run. What were her concerns there?
Yeah. So one question that Marsh kind of raised was, would you want to run for a school board election, like if there was a lot of ballot tension, essentially, like if you had maybe like a governor weighing in, or you had some of these like higher level elected, like elected official campaigns sort of touching on these things and endorsing and kind of running, like, so instead of just running for your local school board, where you have a vested interest, like your kids are like went there and you really just want to get in there and reform it because you're worked up and you've seen that and you are like, I'm ready and I want to make a difference here at this local level. But then at the top, then maybe the state level or even the national level, like, and it's like one of these contested races, like, are you going to jump into the fray if you know that like you're not just going to be fighting like your local opponent, but like a whole machine, like a political machine behind them, so I think that's a question. This is an unpaid voluntary position, essentially, like you're not getting anything out of it. Like, what are the chances you're actually going to go further on in your political career? Usually I think people who run for school board are like, I want to make a difference here. I want to help. And I'm focused on like the success of the school district. And, I don't think there's like not a natural path to the president of the United States from that. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like a high stakes sort of thing. So like, who jumps in? Like, if that like, okay, like I'm going to get all these like attack campaign ads, so it's one of those questions I think that raises, like, if you're really politicizing this local thing, like, does it have to be that vitriolic, right? Does it have to have that kind of like partisanship to it? And like not necessarily. And then again, I think it sort of gets into the question that we were having earlier of like, is that the reality of how it is now? Or would this kind of like welcome that? And again, like sort of the chicken and the egg thing. But I think that is, a risk of this, of making it overtly political, especially in places where it's not, overtly political or thought of that way currently.
Yeah, and she also raised concerns about the impacts this could have on classrooms, on the children who are going to the schools. What's the worry there? Yeah,
I think, and this is a great point too from Marsh, that, essentially, like if you have, kind of what we've seen on the federal level, like if you have a Republican president and then a Democratic president, and then you have like a lot of executive orders, so you kind of have like a whiplash, right? Of like, okay, this policy is on, and then this policy is off, and then this policy is on, and then this policy is off. And if you have like kind of these like back and forths, because, you have a Republican majority school board, and then you have a Democratic majority school board, and you kind of going back and forth. And, like, we're going to have these books in the library, then we're going to take them out, and then we're going to put them back in, like that kind of thing. It'd be an unstable environment for kids. So that's Marsh's argument, is that essentially if you are depoliticizing that and you have sort of like a nonpartisan, like we want what's best for kids sort of position, what's the best way to find that? Then, that puts students first, and then they're going to have like a more stable learning environment.
Yeah, especially when you start to consider things like social emotional learning or critical race theory. Imagine going through 12 years of school and, for a few years you're using social emotional practices, then a few years you're not, and then a few years you are. That's just really would be confusing as a kid to have that much variety of approaches and not have any sense of continuity there. Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.